So we're going to be talking now about the governance of this certification body, and which is going to be an international institution to maximize global democratic accountability, competency, and resilience from pressure from single nations. So this is a problem that many international institutions have been trying to face. Even initiatives or calls for a new UN. Now, there's people around the world that have been calling for a new UN because the UN cannot be fixed. Have been tackling with this problem. There's a very wide global democratic movement that blew up enormously after the Second World War, and then after the Cold War settled in, there was less hopes that this could actually come into place, and receded. But there was real hopes that this could actually, the UN could not just be this fake body, with the winners of the Second World War, but actually be a real democracy. And so the kind of challenges that we're facing is how to create this body and actually make it made it substantially globally accountable. I mean, it's going to be difficult, because representativity across nations, across digital technology, across languages is difficult. You need to maximize competency. So all of these issues are quite complex. Before I pass on the word, maybe I should make a small presentation to what is the governance structure of the Trustless Computing Certification Body, so that then we can see what the challenges are and suggestions from the panelists. So going back to sharing the deck, let's see. Okay, so we have the slide right here. Okay, so in simplified manner, the goal of the design of the governance is to maximize technical proficiency, democratic accountability on a global basis, and resiliency against pressure, and also try to have people which are altruistic and ethical, that also can be measured, in some way. So there are, qualitative things that need to be measured in some way, even though they're hard to measure. So we have about 25% scientific and ethical advisory board, and there will be some scientific method applied to it. A global citizen assembly, so they're going to be randomly selected global citizens, and there's going to be support for language, internet connection. There's a problem that about 45% of the people of the world don't even have internet connection. That is a problem. And so they're major problems. But what we're doing here, we're not trying to achieve perfect governance. We're trying to approximate it as much as it's possible. Even if we don't have something which is as good as we wanted to, it's still going to be way more accountable, democratically accountable, than any other model you have today in the world. So you have 30%, which is current and past parliamentarians. There are organizations that include, they aggregate thousands of parliamentarians around the world. There are partners with us, and they can enable to select in a scientific random way these people from parliamentarians which were active in committees, which were in the defense, civil rights, or innovation, so that they would have some also expertise of the domain. Other will be organizational users, individual users, technical partners, NGOs. So you want also the stakeholders, right? So the first three elements are how to provide technical proficiency, accountability, and resilience. The 10 is you want the stakeholders to be also brought into the picture, because they are essential for the ecosystem to grow and actually move in. So you keep it small because democratic accountability is the main thing. Governments initially are not necessary, are not required, but as soon as 8 of them from at least 3 continents with some requirements actually decide to join, then they will acquire 30%, and all others get diluted. Now I will, just because this was touched upon before, let me show a little bit more of detail of this on a webpage, which is actually referenced down there. Let me do that right now. Okay, so I'm not able to do that now.
So Rufo, I'm just conscious of the time because we're running a bit over. So
okay, fantastic. So let me move back here. Okay, good. So basically, just on the governance, so the governments would actually join in, and the governments would have, by joining, they have an ability to influence the decisions. They have an ability to, a right to submit a request, and an obligation by the body to entertain the request, which is not anywhere. They also would commit, at least formally, to not use any vulnerability they find in the systems which are certified, or even in the certification body itself, to use it to hack it, but actually reveal it to the certification body so that it can be used. And they also get the benefit of being able to use the certification body for internal systems for their own country. And this would be of great interest, especially of third countries which don't have the capabilities to manage certification and technology for their own. So there are a set of benefits on that side, and I explained the other benefits. So this is the governance. The issues are multiple, and so I would open the word now to let me introduce Camila. Camila is the director of Democracia Global from Argentina. She's an activist for many years, even though she's young, but since she was a child, she's been very active and very recognized. The organization has been established by Fernando Iglesias, which is very well known in the global democracy movements. He's also a parliamentarian in Argentina, and he's been a driver of the World Federalist Movement, which has been one of the main organizations promoting global governance. Camila is responsible for many projects, writings, and so on. So she's a leader definitely in South America on these matters. So let me pass on the word to Camila to see what her thoughts are on this matter.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. First, thank you for the invitation and congratulations for your work. I have to apologize, but I will read my speech because, as you know, this is not my native language. So I will read, okay? During the COVID-19 crisis, our economies have become increasingly dependent on digital technologies. We should be concerned about how these perspectives and exacerbates existing inequalities. Most at risk are persons in vulnerable and marginalized situations. The crisis has accelerated the digital transformation that was already underway. The pandemic has demonstrated the potential of digital technologies. The issues associated with the regulation of these technologies can be classified into infrastructure, cybersecurity, human rights, legal and regulatory issues, economic issues, development, and social cultural issues. We need to work on promoting democratic and federal solutions to global challenges to ensure a better future for people. And in this digital age, technologies such as artificial intelligence do not respect national boundaries. For this reason, now more than ever, we need to commit to the path of multilateralism and to achieve peaceful global governance. The scope of governance required to meet the challenges presented by these new technologies. We can understand governance as the formal framework that provides a structure for an organization to establish direction and control. To achieve this, it is required to establish a formal governing structure, both at the organizational level and the IT level. Governance will bring all the stakeholders' interests together and try to harmonize them so that the organization moves forward. In this sense, accountability has an important role in increasing a good governance activity, which is important to achieve the TCCB goals. As I understand, initially, TCCB target domain will be the human transactions and communication with ultra-high requirement of confidentiality and integrity. The target users will be millions of law-abiding, highly targeted and potentially exposed persons and organizations, such as investigative journalism, politicians, political parties, or NGOs. And later will include critical governmental communications, artificial intelligence, and cyber physical system. My question in this is, which will be the election mechanism for this? Of course, it is crucial to secure confidentiality in this democratic social computing platform. civic values such as privacy, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and public safety. But also we need to think about mechanisms to prevent crime. If the system reaches the hands of criminals to use or to hack, in particular transnational criminal organizations that affect enormously the region where I live, Latin America, what are any prevention protocols considering for any hacking attempt to this system? And the Assembly, as a new, sophisticated and detailed governance structure, suitable to achieve the TCCB goals, will count with decision-making power. It will bring together participants with the task of identifying the issues in the TCCB form as a user's perspective, and will develop a set of global principles for the governance of IT system. To this end, it might be relevant maybe to set up a global observatory. This is just an idea, either under the TCCB Assembly or not, but as comprehensive source of information about global IT system and related topics, such as artificial intelligence governance, principles, research bodies, standard projects, and other certification programs or proposals for binding regulations. What we need to keep in mind is what we need to think about, that we need to think about a comprehensive global governance that the world needs. This observatory could be made up of experts and policymakers to improve the decision-making power of the Assembly with no binding power. From our organization, Democracia Global in Argentina and the World Federalist Movement, since a few years we coordinate a transnational working group on the regulation of artificial intelligence and disruptive technologies. The transnational working group gathers people from different countries and continents with common aim of facilitating the establishment of effective time and global governance of artificial intelligence and other disruptive technologies. This transnational working group could be a start to this observatory. The transnational working group recently published a report setting out the case of a global approach to the governance and regulation of artificial intelligence and highlighted some of the key associated issues to consider, such as the good and bad use of artificial intelligence, moral de-skilling and regulation of lethal autonomous weapons, among others. We're going to have an event this July 27 with Lord Timothy Clem-Jones, so of course you are all invited. I will put the information on the chat. And what I think, the sooner that a global approach is adopted, the better for all of us. We need to cooperate between organizations, startups, and states to have a better world. As final remarks, I would like to flag some few questions. For example, which will be the accountability mechanism for this assembly? Which will be the election mechanism? In other words, who choose them and how, and for how long they will have mandates.
Okay, so thank you so much, Camila. It's been a very interesting presentation and insights and questions, and demonstrates how in South America there is a width also of intellectual comprehension of things that sometimes it's not appreciated in the Anglo-Saxon dominated culture. So I really appreciate this. And in particular, your questions on the election and also on the observatory. I think there are two major challenges of creating a democratic global body is what are the constituent processes that lead to this democratic body, because even if you conceive the statute to be perfectly right, you still need to elect the first members, right? And so how do you elect those? And so you have, it's a chicken and egg. And so you need to have some rules for the election of these initial persons, and that's very delicate. So that constituent president can be extremely influential on the outcome. Let's make an example. The American Constitution famously was written by a bunch of people which were very smart, very well-to-do, but most of them were slave owners and owned a lot of land. And they were male. And so they approved the constitution where the right of the individual was only for men to vote that owned a piece of land, and was okay if they owned slaves, right? But even in Greece, there was no democracy in Greece, yes, but for every citizen, there were 9 slaves. And so was that democracy? So anyway, these questions have not been answered. So these details, one of the reasons that the TCCB is not operational now, but it will be operational only 3 months after 700,000 will be coming to the certification body, is to give the necessary resources to actually design this carefully. So this is important. The observatory is also very important because if you want to create a democratic structure, but then the whole media system and understanding around culturally is tainted by the powers that be. Let's talk about AI, for example. The risk of AI and how important AI security is completely influenced by big tech, which have an interest to downplay that risk, right? So an observatory could actually act as a clearinghouse to democratize information around decision making. So this could be key. So I really thank you so much for these insights. We should be on track, I think. Let me just see. Yeah, we are on track for once. Okay, good. The last, I think, insight that Camila, you brought to me is that there was a famous writer called Rudolf Rocker that said, if you take a little tree and you turn it into a bat like a baseball bat, you cannot complain that it doesn't turn out leaves. And it was a reference about the movement of the leftist movement or communism, in which they thought, okay, first you get the power and then you establish a democracy. So if in the creation of democracy, you don't embed democracy in the process of building a democratic system, then it's very unlikely you're actually going to create a democracy. So it's called a recursive problem. No? So these problems cannot be perfected, but there is a lot of historical precedents of this. Think about Eastern Europe and all the democratic and statute that were created, with peace. So there's a lot to be working for. So I think that Daniele is not couldn't make it. So let me just confirm. Daniele, are you here? No. Okay. So he wasn't sure he was going to make it. It's many of the professors they have exams in this area, so he couldn't make it at the last moment. So let me pass on and introduce Michael. So Michael is he's a financial executive. He was chief investment officer at Credit Suisse, a very large bank in the wealth management sector for many years, and now he wrote a very important book, and he writes in the TED and writes in major newspapers, and he's very much promoting the idea of global governance or in promoting global governance. So much so that he published an article, should we create a UN 2.0, which is quite radical. Me and Camila, which come from the global democracy movement, very few people do that. Most of the more trendy organizations, they want to create a parliamentary organization and so on. So he has a very wide view also, I think, from his banking experience working across the world, or really the geopolitical dynamics, which are much more mixed, especially involving third countries, and also many different dynamics and concepts that could lead eventually to democratic structures. So let me pass on the floor to Michael, and thanks for joining.
Thanks, Rufo, and congratulations on a really interesting conference, and also a very worthwhile initiative. And I think it's interesting, not least because it's an area that traverses so many different topics, be it the law, technology, governance, economics, etc. And I suppose the point I wanted to leave you with is that the whole governance landscape is really up for grabs. We are, in my view, we've come to the end now of a sort of 40-year period of globalization, where we effectively had one way of doing things, which was sort of the American-led Anglo-Saxon way of doing things. And now we're going into a multipolar world where you'll have maybe 3 or 4 large different blocks who do things very, very differently. The American way, the European way, the Chinese way. perhaps also Indian, Asian way of doing things as well. And that will vastly complicate, I think, initiatives to have global governance. It also, I think, coming out of the COVID crisis, one of the less promising lessons we've learned is that collaboration across countries and regions has been absent, and that's unusual because in say economic crisis in the last 30 years, they've always been brought to an end by collaboration between nations. And I think what it means for your project is that potentially governance and new governance structures take different forms. They involve maybe less governments, they have more private individuals, companies, etc. So it's probably more of a mixed, inventive type of structure. I think what's also interesting, given the backdrop of the end of globalization, political volatility in the States, Brexit, is that we're at a point in history where I think in many places democracy is being challenged. There are other models being put forward. I should say I'm wholeheartedly in favor of democracy, but I worry it's becoming something of a kind of a minority sport. I do think that trust in institutions is withering across many countries. And you can measure that. There are plenty of surveys out there from the Pew Center in the States. So trust in institutions is falling away, and I think any new institutions that are being built have to consider the issue of trust first and foremost. I think also what's interesting is that the institutional and governance landscape of the 20th century is quite troubled now. So there are a lot of debates about what to do with the World Trade Organization, what to do with the World Health Organization, even the UN, the IMF, etc. And many of those institutions formed the rules of the game of the 20th century. Many of them have solved the problems they were set up to resolve. And I think one of the really exciting, but nonetheless challenging aspects of the 21st century will be trying to craft the institutions of the 21st century for the new problems that we will solve. And those problems will be in trying to limit climate damage, cybersecurity, new forms of money, digital currencies, et cetera, et cetera. And I think your initiative will be part of that. And many of those problems, I think, are driven by new technologies, be it genetic editing, cyber, blockchain, etc. I think what's interesting, and in the book you mentioned, one of the things that I had speculated on is, will we see new political parties? And I think, at the margin in countries like Estonia, we're already seeing a political landscape that's very driven by the rise of technology. And it's not unimaginable that in the future you'll have political parties who, on one hand, want to use technology to root out corruption, or, and we're seeing this already, who really want to invest in technology as a means of controlling people and having a very kind of harsh and penetrating form of governance. Just to bring this down to specifics, I suppose reflecting my own background in economics and finance, one of the areas where many of these forces come head to head is in what I call new money. So, it's kind of decentralized finance, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, etc. And there's a huge battle going on now, effectively based on governance between the world of centralized finance, of governments, of central banks. So in a way, it's the old world, versus new projects, new initiatives, I suppose technologies where governance doesn't exist in many forms in the crypto universe, and where trust is embedded in the technology. And there is this very sharp tension between them where, to an extent, the central banks, the governments can't allow these new forms of money or of assets to thrive because it threatens their own livelihood. and where I think you'll see an effort to put governance in place around these technologies. I think one of the really critical developments here would be the introduction of digital currencies by central banks, which will give them enormous control over people, enormous economic and financial power, and potentially maybe revolutionize the world financial system. And there's already been proposals, for example, around governance. For one proposal is to have a privacy commissioner who will oversee the use of people's data, financial data, by central banks. So I think what you're doing is right in the heart of this. I think what's interesting as well is that it cuts across many of the innovations in politics. When we look at politics today, it's easy to be disheartened, but there are plenty of new initiatives. The Citizens Assembly in my own country, in Ireland, is one that's been a great success, and I think you've used that quite wisely in what you've designed. And there are plenty of others. The use of sort of crowd laws and getting groups of wise and committed people to opine on certain areas. So I think just to sum up, we're at a really critical point in world history. In my view, the period of globalization is over. It's made all the more urgent by COVID, or the potential end of COVID. And there's a whole governance landscape now to be filled and to be built for the future. So I'll stop there and maybe take questions.
Okay, so thank you so much, Michael, for this presentation. As I expected, is very holistic, and it touches upon a lot of many very strong intersecting trends, right? That we need to account to if we want this body to have the result that it wants to have. And so these are technological models, social, political, and so these. I'm really glad that you're joining us here and also in there. So for once we are in advance and we can open up for questions, which we couldn't do before. So we have 10 minutes before the other panel is starting, and so I would really welcome any of the attendees, or possibly then other speakers, but really would give a preference to attendees to type in some questions they may want to ask, and those can be regarding this panel, but also previous panels, even though maybe some of the speakers of the previous panel may not be here. But so I really welcome any of the speakers to any of the attendees to put up questions out there. So we should have probably sent a message in the chat before, so that people would have had time to think. I've seen some comments earlier by Teresa. Is that maybe Teresa would like to formulate that comment in a question? If you would like, Teresa, I could also unmute you. You could do it in person, but
I have no problem in unmuting myself.
Oh, okay. No, I wasn't sure if we had attendees able to unmute. Cool.
No, I'm here. I just shut the video off so I wouldn't do anything weird while other people were talking. So, right. Camila, I have sent you an email to learn more and connect. I'm struck as a communications professional in listening. I've been involved with cybersecurity since 1994. So I always find it fascinating how, you'll forgive me, techno geeks talk about technology, because your language amongst yourselves is perfectly transparent to someone like myself. But mass adoption is an entirely different thing, whether it's at a commercial level or at a political level. But I find it really fascinating, going back to Milka's point about compliance and governance and standards. And it strikes me, having worked with a couple of gentlemen who created the standards around smart card chips and USB ports, why we are belaboring a zero trust policy when everyone can agree that cybersecurity is necessary. It is in all of our best interests, that data protection not only serves as a driver of trust and reputation, but having data protected so that it isn't being monetized by bad actors, etc. So and Rufo, you know, I'm a huge fan of what you're trying to do. We chatted, I don't know, 7 months ago at this point, and I still maintain you're on to it. But it strikes me that we're not scaling fast enough against state actors breaking into infrastructure and having ransomware attacks that are very costly to both governments and to the private companies that are running grids and so on. So it comes down to, for me, what's the holdup? Why can't zero trust standards and protocols be mutually agreed upon? And I agree with Mika. I think that having the adoption within NATO makes the most amount of sense, because you're driving a political bus for, if not the whole world, then certainly a standard that says we're not going to tolerate, cyber attacks under any circumstance. And I will mute myself and let all you really smart people address that.
Someone wants to answer? I don't know, Michael or Nick or Camila or...
First of all, thank you, Teresa, to your email. I think I could understand what you said. I have not a very good internet in this moment, so I will...
Okay, I think Camila got frozen. Let's see, hopefully he's going to come back. Huh? Yeah, let's give it some time. Maybe we could let her know that maybe she could reboot. Sometimes that works. Let's
reboot or chat. But Teresa, just to summarize, I guess the question is, why hasn't it happened yet? It's the eternal question in this, and it has to do with layers of complexity and competing interests amongst a range of other issues. The complexity of developing if you have a look at the United Nations and look at the effectiveness of some of the programs within the United Nations and come into consensus when you have various nation states with competing interests, aligned interests, and that's just one layer. That's one very slim layer. Then you add into the mix the various protocols, international standards, new technologies being developed at one side of the ocean to the other. You build sort of alignment with certain standards that are recognized within certain areas of technology, certain standards like, say, an ISO standard that becomes a recognized certification to some degree. Imagine trying to put all that together and then say to the largest power makers like China and the United States, hey, this is actually a new system. Good idea. We can separate it from both of your diplomatic agreements and differences. Put it over here as a third party. Both of you can sign up and then access this. And that's, Mika, to your point, what kind of nation would want to have that loss of some control? If I'm hopefully not contorting your point, but I think you reference, a third nation outside of, say, outside of the country that's sort of got, at least got some oversight over some of the technology that they're having a look at, whether that be from a regulatory perspective or whether that be more. It's tough, Teresa. It's very, very tough. And what Rufo proposes is I speak with him quite regularly on this. It's very it's idealistic and it's aspirational. I think it's a great goal to achieve, to focus on. And there's been years and years of work that Rufo has been spending to actually speak with people from different areas and different competing interests to see where some of that middle ground is. And that's tough. It's a tough gig, It's diplomacy. It's a hard knocks diplomacy. So anyway, Camila, I think your internet seems like it's back. So if you want to jump in as well.
Yes, so let me add a couple of words. So Yes, we worked quite a bit with many governments because, as we said, governments are not formally required, but are very important that there's an uptake. And so during the events, for example, we had an event in Germany with 2 Department of Defense, Ministry of the Interior participating. In Brussels, we had EDPS, and then we've had events in New York. So, and we've talked to the Secret Service in Italy, and in Switzerland, and so basically we've had these engagements quite a bit. And just a few months ago, together with Nick, we also understood that we should have shifted. Instead of talking to just a part of the nation, we should talk to those people that represent the interests of a nation internationally under all sides. And that's where we thought of starting working with foreign affairs. And in fact, tomorrow we have 2 former top cyber diplomats from the US and Netherlands, which we're very proud to have. And next week we'll also have a conversation with them, and also an equivalent from Israel. We've had quite a few discussions in Germany and so on. So basically, these discussions have been ongoing for quite a bit of time, and the consensus has been widened. So we have a consensus also on the startup spin-off side of you, in which we're going to, because funds also are needed to create this technology and creating the certification in a full-blown way. And so we're on track. And so hopefully, also with this community, people can bring in, help out, and we can actually achieve the goals in time. So, Teresa, thanks a lot for your question. Thanks, Camila, also for the presentation.